Okay, are we live? Okay, what are we? We're continuing. Is Anthea with us, or who we have? Someone from DMV is here this morning, right?
Correct.
Okay,
And Bill from the Boston Truck Association, or one of his members, was going to testify.
oh, okay, all right. Who wants us to lead first?
Nobody. Guess we can go home, Senator Mazza. I mean, we are home. We don't have to go anyplace.
Okay, what are where who wants to go and start this discussion? DMV?
What's on the agenda? First,
It's miscellaneous DMV, and
It's
we
the-
start with,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead, Senator.
It's the TARP law. Remember, we had that.
Oh,
Anthea walk
sure.
through,
the TARP amendment. Okay, thank you.
right? And then basically the committee has to decide, are we going to do that or not? And if not, then I think we're ready to close out the T-bill unless there's something else. I mean, the miscellaneous bill.
Miscellaneous bill. Gee, not the T bill, not yet.
Yeah.
So let's have some discussion on TARP. We had some discussion last week on it. We'd like to continue this discussion. Who has anything to offer?
Well, if could we just refresh our memories? It seems to me that we heard a testimony, I'm not sure if it was from the commissioner, that they had a pamphlet that sort of articulated the recommended practice around the use of TARPs, but it had not gone through rulemaking, and therefore it's just more advisory. So the question before us is whether we should take something that has been advisory, but not enforceable, and make it a statutory requirement. So that was my understanding of, and then we had the person from Graniteville who gave examples of loads shedding fairly significant pieces of rock onto the road because
Right.
of the, so that's, I guess, the question for DMV is, do we support taking what is advisory in the pamphlet and codifying it in Vermont law?
Okay, DMV here?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, go right ahead.
All right, thank you, Senator. My name is Kevin Andrews. I am Captain and Chief of Safety with the Department of Motor Vehicles, and supervise the Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Unit. So just a few thoughts on the proposed legislation is, this is very much in line with what some of our surrounding states have for statutes or rules regarding loads that are required to be tarped, with different states having a few of their own kind of carve outs for this or that. So this language isn't necessarily new to the trucking industry. However, the just a few areas of concern that that I had was whether or not the application of the legislation would be fair and consistent across law enforcement within Vermont. Because right now we have kind of a general load securement statute that really kind of is all encompassing. If something falls off a vehicle, you kind of have a violation of the current statute. We at DMV also have a federal regulation that is a little bit more specific, that covers kind of these aggregate type of loads where stuff could fall or blow out of the back of a truck. And, but it doesn't specifically require a tarp. So, I think requiring a tarp does give a little more latitude for local enforcement to be able to maybe remedy some of their local concentrated issues maybe that they might have surrounding this. But I'm also afraid that where it talks about not needing a tarp if the stuff can't come out of the vehicle. That makes complete sense to me. But it seems like there could potentially be a lot of latitude in there. And in my experience, aside from, very fine aggregates such as like sand, I think a bulk of the issues surrounding this kind of load securement tend to be around the crushed stone, because that's really what people see doing damage to their vehicles. And a lot of, in my experience, a lot of the stone that comes out of vehicles, primarily like a dump truck or a dump trailer or something like that, is not coming off the top of the load. It's either coming off of the sideboards, which the driver failed to brush off prior to pulling out of wherever he got loaded, or over time, the floor of the dump body becomes worn. And what happens is it increases the gap between the bottom of the end gate and the floor of the dump body. And over time, if you don't kind of address that issue, and really by addressing it, you have to re-weld additional steel on the floor of it. What happens is the stone starts to seep out of that opening, and really that's what's coming out for the most part and hitting the roadway. I think the bill has good spirit. I mean, I really think it does, and I really think that it allows more local enforcement to be able to kind of take care of certain situations that they run into maybe a little bit better. But my fear is that, you may get some areas where violations are just being issued because there is no tarp. And when I read this, I could almost say that, even though nothing from the load, I guess I could read it either way. Nothing from the load has come out, therefore it is loaded and arranged so that nothing can come out on the road. Or, I could look at it and objectively try to make a determination whether or not I feel that there is a potential that load could come out. And there's a there's a lot of latitude, I think, between, whether something comes out and whether, in an officer's opinion, something could come out. But I clearly think it definitely gives a lot more, makes it a lot easier to enforce, if something does happen and there's no tarp, then clearly the local officers would not need a lot of, truck enforcement experience to be able to enforce, this kind of statute. So, I guess I may be a little bit all over the place. I mean, I support the spirit. It may come with some potential issues or maybe not. So, but anything that, could potentially increase, highway safety is definitely favorable in my book.
I think you made some good points. Many times we've discussed this over the years, and it comes down to, in my experiences, most of the loads are probably not overloaded, but they fall off the edges, and the tarp is not going to help that. I can't imagine the tarp is just going to cover it. So I think a lot of it's just spillage over the edge, unless it's something that's very light and the wind can take it. But the other issue I would have, my concern would be, how much are we going to fine these folks? What's the fine going to be? Is it going to be, $1,000 or $10? Or that's a concern that you have to be very careful when you do this, because I don't think it's going to address the problem that we think it's going to address. But I'm open to listening to more testimony about this. So, any questions from the officer at this time before we move on to, is Bill with us this morning from the Truck Association?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so any questions of the officer before? Yes, Senator Perchlik.
Thank you, man. Officer, right now, what I think we heard from somebody from DMV the other day was that for them to enforce it, they need to identify, they have to do two things. One, they have to see the item falling off the truck, and two, they have to make a determination that basically traffic safety was compromised. So just falling off the truck wasn't enough for a violation. It has to then make a second determination that there's some kind of safety issue. Is that a correct understanding that you to issue a citation have to both see it and then make that determination under current law?
Is that a question for the industry or? No?
That was a question for
Yeah, it was
Officer Andrews.
For me, Bill. So it's kind of a two-part question. Yes. For the most part, this would be one of those kind of instances where you would have to witness it, or be able to get a clear written statement from somebody else that witnessed it, that's willing to support you if the violation were to go to traffic court. The other part of that is you do have to show that the violation or this object, whatever it was that came off of the vehicle, presented some kind of hazard to other users of the roadway. And where we tend to run into problems with proving that portion of the offense is that, over time, judges have basically told us if it didn't cause an accident, didn't do any damage, or didn't do anything, then it wasn't a hazard to somebody. So yes, to your point, just having something come off of the vehicle in itself didn't always constitute the necessary elements for the current statute.
All right, thank you. And that's kind of my concern, and looking at this over the summer was what I understood, and Anthea looked at what our neighboring states do. I think this gives law enforcement opportunity if they see a potential hazard. You don't have to wait till there's an accident and then pull the person over after something falls off. You can say, that looks like it's going to fall off. So now I can pull them over and say, and it doesn't have to be a tarp. It just has to be secured. So we're not saying only tarps. We're saying secure the load. So if an officer sees a load that's not secure, they could pull them over and say, this is not a secure load. You got to secure this so that this loose material is not going to fall out. And I agree with the officer. It does, it's up to the interpretation of the officer. Like I think a lot of things, whether they see that as a problem or not. But I think it's a lot more clear than the current statute, which also offers a lot of leeway. So,
and I would agree with you to that point. It does definitely allow for a greater latitude for local enforcement to do potentially some enforcement prior to an incident actually occurring.
right. Okay, thanks. And Senator Mazza, on your point about the fines, I did ask Anthea about that when she drafted the language. And she gave me an answer that I can't remember. I think she said there's like a default, but we could put in a specific amount if we wanted to, but if not, I don't know if it's up to the officer and there's a maximum, but maybe Officer Andrew knows too, if there isn't a fine listed, there's a maximum, but maybe it's up to the officer to decide.
I guess, are we really trying to solve a major problem here? Sometimes we move ahead with something that's not really a big problem, but I don't know. I'm just asking the question. I know occasionally you'll see things happen like that, but Bill, let's, anything else from Senator Ingalls, go right ahead.
I agree with you, Senator Mazza. Are we solving a problem that's been a problem throughout the state, or are we solving a problem of one person who's come and testified before us that they're concerned about the company that's up the hill? That might be, as Officer Andrews said, it might not even be coming off the side of the truck. It might be coming through the bottom of their tailgate. And so at the end of the day, what are we trying to solve? Is it a statewide problem, or is it an area nuisance problem that a few people below a business are concerned about?
I'm in an area, there's a quarry, as you know, in Colchester or Winooski line is a big quarry. And, there's hundreds of trucks a day that go in and out of that. And I have never heard from my area here, one single complaint. And I've never seen gravel or anything on the highway there. They come down a steep hill before they get on the interstate or Route 7. And I just wondering if that's, I'm sure that would have been a major problem right there at the quarry because they're in a highly trafficked area. But that's why I'm asking the question, because I don't know. I've never heard our police department say anything. I've never heard anyone. And neither do I see any gravel that comes off any vehicles that leave the quarry every day. But maybe there is. I'm just trying to make sure that we're addressing a major problem, or is it something minor that we overburden with new laws and restrictions? Questions before we move on to Bill? Bill, you have a comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And
Okay.
first I'd say, I can't find on the website the language that folks seem to be looking at. So I apologize for not having it in front of me here. But I would say that generally speaking, a lot of this comes down to, is it already being enforced in other manners? For example, I did call up this aggregate company in Graniteville, even though they're not a truck and bus member. I did speak to the ops manager yesterday, and he said that they have an Act 250 permit that requires covered loads, and that the difficulty here is that sometimes you have, who are you looking at to enforce this against? Is it the crushing operation, or is it the trucking company or the hauler of that? And these can range from a pickup truck to a dump truck. And what that operator is doing is at some point on that operator of the vehicle, not on the operator of the plant. So, the enforcement of this is potentially problematic if you're saying who is going to pay a fine, and also what other restrictions or protections are in place already, whether it's through the permit process for natural resources or the municipal police being asked to go out there and monitor activities. Those are all things that can happen already. And again, not to look at this specifically with regard to one operation in Graniteville, which may be problematic. I can't speak to that, whether it is or not, because I'm not their attorney and they're not in my association. But having reached out to them, it seems like there are opportunities to address this issue short of legislation. And it may be a neighborhood issue out there. I'm sure this happens in other areas of the state where it hasn't been brought to your attention yet, but I also know that there's other ways to deal with this. So I guess you need to weigh whether you put this into statewide enforcement or provide resources to concerned individuals so they can get redress for their concerns in other forums. And again, I'd like to see if I could take a look at that language before commenting on it. But from what I've heard, Captain Andrews say, I would generally agree with him on that. And if it's something that we deem that it's important for DMV to go into rulemaking on, we're happy to take part in that and provide testimony in that forum. So that might be a better place for it. It would be rulemaking. If we don't match up with states around us, that's, consistency is good. And let's try to make sure we don't inadvertently end up with inconsistent results based on who's enforcing the regs. So, I'd like to reserve a comment on the language when I can get my eyeballs on it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any questions from the committee? I'm happy to answer.
Another question would be, where do you draw the line on what to cover? I don't know, because we've all followed vehicles where all kinds of stuff flies off the trucks, pickup trucks and mattresses. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that fall off them. Even trash. You got even trash on that. So I guess my question would be, where do you draw the line on what is covered? And I think, I don't know. Those are questions that I'm trying to answer myself, but maybe someone. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I know, load securement is a broader issue than just the cover. It's everything from the size of the ratchet straps you use to tie down a load of lumber to
Right.
To gravel. So
Questions? Yes, Senator Birchlick.
I just want to let Bill know that I did email you the language when I first got it from Anthea, but also Liz just said she emailed that again. So I don't know if that included you, but also if you go to the website and look under Anthea as a witness, you'll see it as slippage language is what it's called there. But the language is pretty specific about, what would need to be covered and not. And
Okay.
I mean, I think
There's the latest.
the issue of variability is what we have now, and specifically about the NRB. One of the reasons she called me, that particular constituent, is that the NRB basically refuses to enforce that Act 250 permit that the trucks be covered, and that's why she's taking all those pictures. And I've tried to talk to the NRB. They're unable to enforce that particular Act 250 thing, which is a bigger issue. But I thought, I'm not trying to solve that issue. I just thought that constituent could give an example of one problem, because you have to be there and see it fall off, and you have to make that determination, and we're not in line with the other states, is why I thought I'd at least bring it forward for the committee's consideration, and just so folks know.
Senator Mazza.
Yes, Senator Chittenden.
So thank you. I couldn't find the language either. So thank you, Liz, for getting that out. And now that I have it, I'd like to ask Captain Andrews a question, if I may. Do you see gravel, as I'm looking at the language that I just got to refresh my memory? I don't see any distinction or discrimination in types of material, but do you see large gravel as more of a safety hazard that might be better to tease out or draw out, as that can pop tires or otherwise more likely affect or impede, since it's smaller visual, but it's harder substance, as opposed to, say, a bag of trash, an aluminum can, or a mattress, which is quite visible? Do you see gravel as worthy of distinction in consideration of new regulations regarding loads or whatnot? From a safety perspective.
Yes, Senator. That gets to be somewhat sticky depending on what you're looking for an end result. I, quite frankly, over the years have received numerous complaints about garbage coming out of commercial haulers, but clearly it's nothing that would ever constitute any kind of hazard to somebody else on the road. I mean, it's not in bulk amounts. It's basically an aesthetic kind of thing where people don't want to see it on the side of the road, and to that respect, in some circumstances, a tarp or something would prevent a lot of that from coming out. I think it's and actually, when you start talking about the aggregates, it's actually the lighter aggregates. I don't see, quite honestly, anything that's got much weight, so none of your gravels, your crushed stones or anything like that, generally coming out of the back of a truck. And by coming out of the back, I mean like up over the top, to where a tarp would necessarily prevent that. But where you will see it is with lighter cargoes, such as your sands, things like that, where, just speed and momentum itself can just kind of shave the top of that load right off and just kind of, spray it out into the road. Not really in the amounts that would blind somebody, but nevertheless, I mean, I guess it, somebody could argue that would damage a vehicle to some extent. So I honestly believe that most of the complaints we deal with aren't necessarily something a tarp in itself could prevent, as far as safety wide goes. But certainly tarps over certain loads could prevent just kind of a lot of garbage type things from just flying out and just being, an eyesore in communities. And you see it, it's usually fairly prevalent along stretches of road that lead to these kind of solid waste facilities. Where a lot of that traffic, congregates right before it gets to where it needs to unload. I can't testify that all those vehicles, have an ability to be tarped. Because some of it is just, laziness on drivers, driving compactor trucks that aren't compacting it before they run down the road. They're just throwing it in the back and going. So,
But officer, if you, in your position, and along with all the other officers, if you have to see something happen. So if you come upon someone now and something is flying, you would have the authority just to stop and say, a warning, right? Wouldn't you do that now under present law? Not law, but couldn't you do that now if you saw something flying off? Because you got to see it to happen. So you would stop the truck and say, I'd be very cautious in the future because you're dropping stuff on the highway. Is that correct or is that wrong?
no, that is correct. And, at a minimum, we could issue a warning.
Right.
And, under federal law, that still constitutes, a ticketable offense in itself without necessarily having the.
That's just good judgment on the officer's part. You don't need a statute to tell that if you're following the vehicle, something is happening. I don't know if it's going to solve anything. I always worry about mandates that are one more thing you have to, and I don't know what you're going to solve by doing this. I think it's going to be a gigantic expense. And does it really warrant a ticket or something that you have to look after? Because an officer right now has got a million things to look after presently. And I don't know if this is, and if you see a violation now, like I said, Whitcomb's Quarry down the road here, five miles from me, they leave all day long back and forth. And you have an officer sitting there watching the trucks leave? I don't know. I just worry about over regulating something that doesn't necessarily need it. Maybe I'm way off on this one, but that's my questions. Yes, Senator Perchlik.
Yeah, thanks. Just want to reiterate that it doesn't require a tarp. It just requires that that the loads be secure. And I think the example that you just gave, that you have to see it fall out of the truck, is one of the issues that I thought we should just consider. But I think, Senator Maz, it's a good position to be worried that we're over-regulating. I think that's a good starting point. I think this is just saying that if an officer happens to be behind a truck and there's loose things that look like they could easily fall out, just if they took a turn a little tight, then they could pull them over. They don't have to wait till the rocks start falling out of the truck to pull them over. But right now, they have to actually see it fall out. So that's the only difference. I don't see it as an expense, because I'm sure the Bus and Truck Association and truckers want to have secure loads. I mean, this is valuable stuff. They don't want it spilling out. They don't want to cause accidents. So it's not really changing behavior other than the people that are irresponsible, to say it's going to be harder to get away with being irresponsible with how you're moving your materials about the state, because you could get pulled over even if the officer doesn't see it actually falling out when you go, or because the officer would have to drive behind them until it falls out. But this way they could say that is a safety hazard, just the way it's unsecured, and then I can pull them over and give them a warning and say, hey, this has got to be secured.
But aren't
I'm
we trying to, if there's 1% of the violation out there now, so we're going to enforce, we're going to make mandate for 99% more of the people out there to secure their loads?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, my understanding is they're supposed to be secured now. This is just about how.
I just know the Truck and Bus Association, I'm not speaking for them, but I'm sure they could tell their members, hey, look, guys, you want legislation that's going to fine you or mandate what's happening, and just in good policy could correct that small percentage. I don't even know if it's 1% or 2% or maybe it's bigger. I don't know. Like I said, I've never. Senator Ingalls, you have your hand up.
Just a question to Officer Andrews and to Senator Perchlik's point. I just want to be clear in my mind. Officer, if you were to be behind a vehicle that you thought it was an unsafe load and it could create a hazard, do you have what's needed to be able to pull that vehicle over and make suggestions to what they could be doing different?
So yeah, I mean, I can unfairly answer that because, you know, we enforce the federal regulations, which gives us definitely more latitude than, you know, the most municipal and state officers in the state. But clearly, you know, one of the top priorities of any enforcement officer should be to try to prevent an issue before it happens. So, you know, whether it's an enforceable offense or not, if it appears to be a safety issue, I would like to think that, you know, the officer would make that action and stop that vehicle and offer up a suggestion, or, you know, and maybe it's a simple solution that the driver wasn't even aware of, you know, before it becomes an issue. Now, whether it becomes a legitimate enforceable action where a traffic ticket's written and successfully prosecuted, you know, a lot of that lays within, you know, what happens in court. So, but there's definitely room in the middle. I mean, you can certainly affect a traffic stop based on safety, based on a legitimate safety concern, even if it doesn't rise to the level of something that the officer feels is a ticketable offense.
Questions? Bill Smith?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. So in looking at the language here in 2A, it appears to create what I would call some absolutes or zero tolerance. I mean, if you don't close in any opening that might allow something to fall out, you're in violation. And if you have unless you have no loose substance can fall from your vehicle, you know, you need to have a covering on it. So there seems to be, if I would use the term somewhat loaded here, zero tolerance built into that, as opposed to the farmers down in B sub 2, which are allowed to exercise reasonable care. Now, having hauled a manure spreader on Route 2 and on Goddard Flats in Plainfield many years ago, many times, I can tell you that in that case, something does fall off, and the reasonable answer there is you take your bucket loader down afterwards and get it off the dang road. So, you know, the reasonable care, I guess it sort of points out to me that if we put something in legislation versus going into rulemaking, which is already allowed in 1454B here, maybe there could just be some simple, you know, direction from the committee that DMV shall enter into rulemaking regarding, you know, secured loads in the state of Vermont, and not create a legislative strict scrutiny of this. Thank you.
Senator Mazza?
Yes, Kitchell.
Well, the reality is that they have authority for rulemaking, but once those rules are accepted, they have they're the equivalent of law. And so we're right back to, and then in order to have the rules approved, as you well know, they go through LCAR, which then has to determine that the rules are consistent with legislative intent. So we could get into something circular here if you say, oh, go the rulemaking, don't go the statutory route, because if the administration move forward with the regulatory process, that you've still got that hanging issue. It's what is the intent? And then it's very hard for LCAR to be the forum to duke that out when our intent is not to take action, clarify it in statute, and say, go forth and make rules, and then have them go through the same debate we're having right here in committee.
Yep.
So I would not think that rulemaking would help resolve this. That's simply by the nature of rules.
No, I think that's correct. I'll go back to my first question, and I know it sounds like a broken record, but I'd like to know how major of a problem this is before we can go down this road, because I think it's a minor thing, and I just hate to enforce something or try to enforce something that's not a major problem. That is
So-
being invested.
Senator Mazza, so if I could just make sure I understand, DMV does have the authority, or any law enforcement official does have the authority to stop and say, this is a safety
Right.
hazard. It doesn't mean that it would be subject to fine or whatever, but they could be at least put on notice that there's a hazard.
Yep.
The other question I have is one of liability. If in fact a load has not been secured, then and rocks fall off or there's damage or someone is hurt or whatever, is there? I would think that and this gets back, I suppose, which party do you sue? But I would assume that there is a legal, even though we don't have a statute right now, someone who is injured could in fact sue. Is that the risk that's also there when you don't secure a load? I'm just raising the question.
Officer, can you answer that
Or maybe Anthea is an attorney, but I don't think there's anything that would say if you don't have a law that governs it or you can be fined for it, it doesn't in any way mean that you can't be sued for damages under, under Vermont law. Anthea, you got your hand up, so.
Oh, I didn't see her. Okay, go right ahead, Anthea. I'm sorry, I can't see you.
I was invisible. I just materialized.
Oh,
For the
okay.
record,
Okay. Thank you.
Anthea Dexter Cooper from the
Yes,
Office
thank
of
you.
Legislative Counsel. So without getting too much into tort law, there is a concept called negligence per se, which says if there is a safety statute, you sort of meet your initial burden to prove negligence if you can show that someone violated a safety statute. And I do think 1454A, as it is currently in law, would be a safety statute that someone who was injured if something fell off of the vehicle that wasn't properly secured would look to. If you added in A2, as is proposed in Senator Pertlick's amendment, that would be another safety statute that could be pointed to for purposes of negligence per se.
Okay. But right now, you're not precluded in any way. I mean, you have that first statutory provision that you referenced.
Okay, any questions? Any further comments? Okay, I don't think at this point, what does the committee want to do? You want to hear some other testimony at this point, or we want to let it rest for a day or so, or how do you want to work it? Or we can vote on it. Doesn't make any difference.
I'm Senator Mazza.
Yep.
I'm
Senator.
not sure I followed Anthea's last point. So what was the compromise middle ground solution? The softening language was just 2A in the document I'm seeing and nothing else?
So I wasn't pointing to a middle ground. I was just saying subdivision 2A, without the exceptions, that would also be a safety statute that someone could point to if it was enacted and existed as law as the basis for proving negligence per se. And it's not to say that if there wasn't a statute that prohibited this or addressed this, that someone couldn't bring a claim of negligence. It just makes the threshold that the plaintiff needs to prove a little bit easier to meet, because they can say, there's a statute that says XYZ. The statute is intended to prevent harm that happened to me. They violated the statute. I have met this sort of burden piece for a claim of negligence.
Yes, Senator, who's next? Bill, you had your hand up?
Well, to answer Senator Chitten's point, based on what council has told you, then if this 2A is put in the statute, that if there is technically, if you're in strict violation of that, something came off your truck, it went past your tarp, it hurt someone, you're on the hook for it. And there's no discussion then about, reasonable care or anything like that. Or, he had, 18 out of 20 tie downs, secured on the truck, and it came loose in the wind. So it's a slippery slope for liability. And, I was generally a plaintiff's lawyer when I was doing litigation. So I do look for those opportunities to get to a damages discussion, certainly. And you don't want people to get hurt. we certainly don't, I don't want anyone to take this like the trucking industry ignores this. It's just, do we put it into statute and create this very low tolerance situation without having the time to go through it with people that frankly know more about this than Bill Smith, their lawyer. And I'd like to maybe have Joe Barrett talk about covered loads and a couple other folks come in if this committee wants to hear from those who actually tie down loads for a living. And
If
I've
I
got
could-
some concern with the senator.
If I
Yes.
could respond to Bill's
Sure, go
comment.
right ahead, Senator Chittenden, go ahead.
Is that not something that we might want, though? Wouldn't we want the threat of liability to motivate the behaviors to properly tie down our loads to improve safety on the roads?
Do we want to have, well, it's one thing to have the threat of liability. It's another one to be 100% liable without any kind of mitigating factors allowed to be considered.
All right, thanks.
Senator Mazza?
Yes, Senator Herzog, yep.
Yeah, well, given that, well, first I just want to point, it's not a zero tolerance because it does, if you look at line 13 and 14, it says, if it's arranged that no loose substance can fall, then there's no covering is necessary. So I wouldn't say it's a zero tolerance for causing a safety hazard, but it's not a zero tolerance for covering the load. But that being said, given the fact that Mr. Smith just saw the language today, I think it does make sense that we, give him a chance to talk to his members. I'm happy to talk with them to see if there's other language. Or I agree with you, Senator Maz. It's not, the biggest issue. It's not happening all over around the state or anything. So I'm willing to, work with Mr. Smith or others to see if there's something different that we could do, and we could bring it up later. And if that, I also don't want to hold up the miscellaneous transportation bill, the miscellaneous DMV bill. So
What else do we have to take on the
Round into
miscellaneous
this.
bill? What else is there that we have to discuss in this miscellaneous bill? Anything else?
I don't think so, unless Anthea
I
thinks
think
there's
we're all done
something.
on everything else, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, so
Unless you wanted to spend more time on boats.
No, please. I wish you. I've got it all. I've got too much boats there in my head now. So, what's the committee want to do? You want to give it 24 hours? You want to give it a week? You want to give it or a vote today? I'm open to suggestions here. I think
I'm not ready to vote today, and I think in fairness, we ought to give people the businesses that would be affected an
Okay.
opportunity to understand this before I would feel comfortable.
Okay, so Bill, you want to have some folks, like you suggested a moment ago, to add to this discussion, and then we can wrap it up.
Yes, sir. I'll ship it out to them this morning to take a look at.
Okay, when you're prepared, get a hold of Liz, and we'll talk about it. Is that
Thank
all
you.
right with the committee?
Mhm.
Okay, we have a consensus. All right, anything else in this bill? You said nothing else we have to discuss in this bill, right? Now we're going to, our next one is at 11 o'clock to talk about the dealers bill. Is that correct? That's our next item? At 11 o'clock. Okay. Anything else? We want to go offline right now and have a committee discussion for a moment? Anthea? Liz, you want to put us down?
Well, I don't think we
Yeah.
can do committee discussion if we're going to be talking policy. We
Okay.
can take a break, but
We can take a break. All right, take a
so
break.
for people listening, they might get the impression that somehow we're
Oh, no. Okay.
conducting
No,
official
I was
business.
talking more about an agenda. So,
Okay.
okay.
We just talk about Senator Kitchell's cat and my.
Yeah, that's always important. So,
Yeah. And I'm
we're-
back. I'm back on Henry duty. So
we're
yes,
gonna-
I can
we're
give you
gonna,
an update.
we're going to go off until 11 o'clock. And if the committee wants to stay on board for a second and anything, just say hello to each other. It's always great to get to know each other a little better. So Liz, you're putting us,
We're still on.